when I started talking about money, it was October 2018, which was when I had this come to Jesus moment of realizing like I just had a salary bump of going from making 70 grand a year to making 90 grand a year. And I had that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, if I do not learn how to manage this money, I'm going to blow through every single dollar just like I have every other promotion before this. So I really need to see where the heck is my money going. And that was October 2018. And at the time, I had that $70,000 of debt from a car loan and student loans. And what I decided to do was just write down everything that I spent my money on for 2 weeks, just 2 weeks. I didn't even go for a whole month. But at the end of 2 weeks, I went through and I started categorizing everything and seeing where my money was actually going. And what I realized after those 2 weeks was that I was blowing like $600 every 2 weeks on eating out, cocktails, and then being hungover. Because when I'm hungover, I'll just order food from GoPuff or DoorDash or whatever, anything to make myself feel better. And so when I really looked at that number, I was like, wow, if you looked at my spending, and I'm a big believer that where our money goes is what we value a lot of times. Now, obviously, we don't value our debt or things like that, but when we can decide where our money goes, when we have that discretionary income, that's showing us what we really value. And if you looked at my spending, it would tell you that I valued being drunk and being hungover. And it was like, that's not who I want to be. That's not what's important to me. If you had asked me what was important to me, I would have told you traveling, spending quality time with my friends, visiting my family, things like that. But I wasn't doing that stuff. I was YOLOing my money, going out to random things, doing things with random people, and not spending in a way that was at all aligned with my values. So that was a really big wake up moment for me, because the important thing is I realized I had money. It was just not going to the places that I wanted it to go to. And that is a lucky situation to be in, because I had resources. I could then decide to tell those resources to go where I wanted it to go. And so that was really a wake up call for me. It had to happen because I had to be kind of disgusted with myself to be like, okay, I'm ready to change. You have to have that moment of like, oh, this is not who I want to be, in order to decide, all right, I'm going to do better. And that's when I first started budgeting. And I had previously tried like the envelope method before, using all cash and things like that. And that never worked for me. And girl, I tried to do that for 2 years, but I kept trying for some reason. And so finally I was like, all right, clearly that's not working for me. So I decided to go onto Google and search for a budgeting template. And I pulled up the Google Sheets budgeting template, which is the budgeting template I still use. And I started making a zero-based budget and assigning my dollars to everything that I wanted it to go to. But my biggest thing was I decided, okay, looking at all the money I have and what I think is reasonable for me to spend in all of these categories, I could reasonably put $2,000 a month down on my student loan debt. And so that's what I started doing. I started with this focus that being debt-free was the most important thing, and that was the only thing I had to do. I'd worry about the investing stuff later because that seemed confusing and scary. So I only focused on paying off my debt as much as possible. And I will say, now I regret that. Like,
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's one of my biggest regrets when it comes to money management, is because those were still my years in my 20s. And we know that when we're investing in our 20s, those are some of our most powerful dollars that we could be using. And my student loan debt, it's at 3.54% interest rate. Why am I trying to pay that off early if cash flow is not an issue? And one time I did the math just to see how much paying off $40,000 in 2 years would have been had I invested that money instead, because that's a lot of money. If I had invested that over a 30-year period, it would have turned into $1 million. And I was like, oh.
But you know what, though? The interesting part about this is that I think also I do believe in investing while getting out of debt.
For
but
sure.
Also think about, you've been able to leave your job, right? If you still had that lingering over your head, it might have taken you more time to decide, okay, I'm going to go all in on this business.
For sure. Yeah, it might have been scarier to go out on the business just because it was a much larger number. But if my payments were the same, I don't know if that would have stopped me, because my payments right now are about $600 a month. And that's not an issue for me. I think that's when it's like really key is like if cash flow is a problem, then yes, absolutely. You need to figure out how to lower that debt and how to make it work within your budget. Because yeah, who wants to quit if cash flow is an issue and you're scared about paying that $600 every month? But luckily I had the privilege of really proving my business first and then deciding to leave and was like, all right, my bare minimum expenses are this. Can I cover this every month? And I was like, yes, I can. So if worst case scenario happens, I know I've got this covered.
So did you have any credit card debt at the time, or was it just student loans?
No, luckily I never fell into the trap of credit card debt because I was so afraid of credit cards because of what my parents had been through. In fact, I did so much travel from the age of 18 until the age of 25 or 26 when I finally got my first credit card. To think of all the travel hacking I could have done in those years.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's probably a blessing that I didn't have a credit card because I never ended up in credit card debt. And clearly I was good at living above my means, but because I didn't have access to one, because I was scared of them and had grown up with this idea that credit cards were bad and you were going to ruin your life if you had a credit card, I never got into that debt.
So you went from living paycheck to paycheck to, how old are you now?
31.
To being 31 on track to retire or multimillionaire. If you could pinpoint some of the key changes that you made to get the results that you have today, what would they be, aside obviously from budgeting that we already talked about?
Yeah, so I'd say the first step would be that move of like, look at where your money is going. So many people think they know where their money is going, but after coaching hundreds of people on how to budget, I can tell you most of us have no idea where our money is actually going. The next thing is, I would say, educating yourself on investing and understanding how investing works is one of the most powerful things that you can do because it'll help you make informed decisions. I think a lot of us enter into the personal finance community through the debt-free community. So a lot of us make the same mistake that I made, is that we focus a little too much on becoming debt-free without understanding the opportunity costs and making an informed decision on what's actually best for our goals. So it's usually a more nuanced approach. There's a lot of voices in the space that are like, only focus on your debt. And it's like, the reason that message is so loud is because it's a simple message. It's an easy one for people to focus on.